Hello and welcome to Traditional Painting the Digital Way. This is where I use digital painting apps to teach traditional painting techniques. This is part 5 and the last part in my Peacock series. And in this video we're going to go ahead and finish up the feathers and the wall and the ground in front of the wall. If you're following along traditionally, check out part 1 where I have a list of all the paint, brushes, and the canvas that I use. We're going to be using Infinite Painter for Android, and here I'm just finally putting the last touches on the rock wall that the Peacock is sitting on. And here I want to go ahead and show the little rocks that are put underneath the big giant slab that the Peacock is sitting on. So I'm adding some little lines there and just painting in the edge of the big rock slab that he's sitting on. And then here I want to go ahead and make some broken and jagged lines around the bricks, and we just want to try to give it a very irregular and uneven look because this is a rock wall. It's not made out of uniform bricks, and so I'm using a dark purplish mixture. And if you're following along traditionally, you can use Hooker's green and dioxazine purple, or you can use ultramarine blue and burnt umber and throw in a little bit of white acrylic gesso just to make it opaque. And in here you can see that I went ahead and made a whole bunch of broken lines and irregular shapes for the rocks. And then you can go ahead and sort of add some lighter spots in the rocks. I'm adding a little bit more of lighter places on the top rock slab that the Peacock is on. But don't kill all the other colors underneath. You want different variations of color because you want to show that it's a rock-like texture. And then you want to go ahead and kind of smudge out the lines that you've put for showing the rocks because they're going to be jagged. They're not going to be real clear cut lines. They're going to be jagged and sort of blurred, and so you want to go ahead and smooth those out, and you can do that with a paper towel or your finger if you're following along traditionally, or another brush. And then you can just use the smudge tool on Infinite Painter, and probably use the smudge tool set on a filbert or oil paint or something that will just kind of smear it a little, but you don't want to get rid of all the dark color there. So I went ahead and did that, and I'm adding a little bit of some yellow ochre to the top there just to kind of give it a look. And here I was trying to get it saved because I was almost finished, and then I wanted to go ahead and put some jagged lines a little bit on the top there, just a little bit more cracks and some texture to the rock there on the giant slab. And I wanted to use a really small line for that. And so I'm using a dark mixture and just kind of sort of lightly smudging it out. You want to leave some of that texture there because, like I said, you're trying to get a rock texture here, and you want it to look rough and have a little bit of some granite-like look to it. And so that's what I'm trying to do right here. And just working a little bit more on the bricks too, and adding some cracks to the bricks, and you can add a little bit of some highlights around the edges, or the rocks. They're not bricks, but they're rocks. You want some highlight along the edges, and you want some darks and some cracks, and You're just trying to give it a little bit of a texture there. And then I wanted to go ahead and add a little bit of the highlight to some of the rocks on the top. Add a little bit of a really thin line, and you can use your script brush if you're following along traditionally, and just use a really thin down light colored paint, probably some white acrylic gesso with some cadmium orange light thrown in. Just a light color there, and you want to smudge it along the top of the rocks, and that just kind of gives it a three-dimensional look there. And so I'm kind of trying to do that on several of the rocks. Just you want the rocks to have different colors in them, browns and purples. You don't want everything to be the same. You want them to be different and have jagged edges and look broken, but still squared off enough that they could actually be made into a wall. And so that's what I'm doing there. And I'm drawing the lines and then going and smudging back the white colors and just trying to sort of show the light reflecting on the edges of the rocks there that are in the wall, but not completely smudging out all the lines. Just trying to get kind of a jagged rock-like texture there. And this is excellent practice to just do a wall, actually, by itself, or in a garden or something, and just paint rocks. That's also an excellent way to learn how to do rocks. Just do a study of a garden wall or something like that. And so that's what I'm doing here, just adding a little bit more dark in between the rocks to sort of show the shadows of them, and just refining that shape. We're in the point where we're just trying to refine shapes and things now. And so I wanted to go ahead and work on the dirt a little bit at the bottom of the rock wall, and you can kind of make the dirt a little bit uneven, like it's sort of piled up or it's been pushed up from rains and mud and things like that, and just kind of give it a sort of a mounded looking texture, like little mounds or little clods of dirt there. And so that's kind of what I'm trying to do there, and work a little bit more on the bricks. I decided they were a little too slanted, so I went back and made the vertical lines a little bit straighter, because that helps with the illusion that your wall is not leaning or something. You don't want your wall to look like it's leaning, so you go ahead and sort of make the vertical lines a little bit straighter. Now the horizontal lines can be sort of jagged and sort of all different shapes, as long as you keep them sort of horizontal. But you want to go ahead and check and just make sure that your wall doesn't look like it's leaning. So I just wanted to go ahead and try to do that, and I wanted to add a little bit of some grass to settle the wall down into the dirt so that it doesn't look like it's floating, or a perfect made edge there. You want to kind of break that straight edge up, and so I'm adding little clumps of grass, and I'm using the dry brush and Infinite Painter. You can use your number 4 flat brush, and if you're following along traditionally, or and just kind of feather out the edges too. It's kind of the same technique that you use to make the feathers. You want the edges of the grass to kind of have individual strands there. You want little clumps, and you kind of want to connect them in a zigzag format there. You want them to kind of touch a little bit, the clumps. You don't want to just make straight rows of clumps. You want to sort of make a zigzag space and leave some empty pockets of space between the clumps of grass, but kind of have them touching, and just kind of in maybe a Z shape or something like that. And that just breaks up the monotony and makes sure that you don't just have a straight line or something. And then here I wanted to use some of the splatter brushes to add a little bit of some gravel to the dirt, make it look like there's little tiny rocks in it. And you can use some of the splatter brushes in Infinite Painter. And if you're following along traditionally and you have an old toothbrush, just go ahead and dip an old toothbrush in some paint and splatter it very gently on the ground, and make sure that you don't get it on your wall or your Peacock, and just wipe that. If you do, just wipe it off right quick. And that will kind of give you sort of a gravelly look. So I just wanted to go ahead and do that and get that look that the rock wall is kind of sinking down into the dirt. And that just kind of settles things down. And here I'm just kind of looking at the rock wall again and making one final check on it, and then I want to go ahead and add a little bit more detail to the eye design on the peacock feathers. And if you study the feathers, you can see that they have a dark green color kind of also on the bottom of the teardrop shape. So I'm adding a little bit of that green into them, and just trying to kind of get the further teardrop shape that they have. And since this is kind of a long distance paint, I mean, it's not up close, and you can see every little detail painting on the bird's feathers. You don't have to quite draw them just perfect. They can be a little bit like slanted and like they've got other feathers over the top of them, and so you won't be able to see the design just as a perfect design. Now, as I've said before, some peacock paintings are stylized, and they actually just draw the tail out with perfect designs. But if you're doing this and you're using a real photo reference, and you kind of want it to look like a real peacock, not just a stylized type of peacock, which there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I love those kind of pictures where they're kind of a design-oriented and stylized look. I really like those. But if you're trying to get kind of a realistic wildlife type painting, this is the way their tails look. They're not perfect. They don't have everything aligned, and there's all kinds of feathers sticking out on the edges of their tail, and they're dragging them on the ground, and they get dirt on them and everything else, because they are, after all, just a bird. And so they won't look completely and wonderfully perfect. So for this painting, his tail is going to be more just what a regular peacock does when he drags his tail on the ground. And so they're not going to look absolutely perfect. But I do want to go ahead and show the design, though, because you can see that it has a really neat design on each peacock eye feather on his tail. So just go ahead and add more feathers along the edges and make the edges kind of ruffly and feathered out, because it's not completely they're not completely together on the edges. He's got it kind of spread out, his tail kind of spread out, but he doesn't have it really big spread out like they do when they're walking around and they have their tail really showing up pretty. So I'm just working a little bit more on the edges and working a little bit, just trying to get a little bit more of the feathered look on the tail, and trying to get it kind of show the way the feathers go, but not showing individual complete feathers here. And that's kind of a tricky thing to do. You just have to kind of add darks and lights and go back and forth on this, and that's what I've had to do, is just add darks and lights and go back and forth on it. And just finally decide that it looks good enough to look like a real peacock. And so I just went ahead and decided that it was good and it looked like a peacock, and it gives everybody sort of an idea of what all you have to do to paint a peacock. So this is the end of my peacock series. And if you want to see what I'm going to do next, hit the subscribe button. And if you have any questions or any suggestions, just leave them in the comments down below. And thanks everybody for watching, and thank you so much for your support. And I will catch you later.